full report itself, however, is a summary. It summarizes 1,800 research studies examining the health effects of microwaves from both electromagnetic fields, which includes power lines and appliances, and also from radio frequency emissions, RFR, which includes wireless technologies. The Bioinitiative report was prepared by 29 authors from 10 countries, including 10 holding medical degrees and 21 PhDs and some other degrees. The summary reports key scientific evidence of biological harm for the following: damage to sperm and reproduction, damage to children, stating that children are more vulnerable for fetal and neonatal effects, autism, hypersensitivity, effects on the blood-brain barrier, health effects on the brain tumors, effects on genes or genotoxicity, effects on the nervous system, which you can probably observe today as our struggle to read our reports, effects on cancer, including childhood leukemia, adult cancers, melatonin, breast cancer, and Alzheimer's disease. The wireless industry is virtually unregulated. They make their own rules to maximize their profits with little regard for human health. The FCC is a captured agency directed by representatives of the same industry they regulate. The only opportunity for protection of human health, particularly children and fetuses, seems to be here in the Massachusetts legislature. So we are depending on you. The Bioinitiative report concludes that public safety limits are inadequate to protect public health. I strongly suggest that you read the Bioinitiative report to the public 2012 so you are educated and more able to come to your own conclusions on these bills. I am a person injured actually by electromagnetic fields and chemicals, and would like to add a couple more comments about that. There are 7 more bills about chemicals, and because I was injured by those combinations, also mercury and lead were in there. I'd just like to say it took me 30 years to figure out what was causing my disability. For someone with cancer or sleep problems or anxiety or headaches or fertility problems, it can be tricky to identify a cause. You don't always have 30 years to figure out what it is that's causing your health problems. But the research and the growing numbers are telling us that we need to do something soon about massive numbers of toxins in our environment. The point is, people are being injured unknowingly every day by combinations of toxins, and the numbers of people getting sick are growing rapidly. The only place we are able to really make meaningful change, again, is here at the state level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. I think there was one other person who was. Oh, thank you. Lisa Nagy?
Yeah, I forgot to call me up.
I'm sorry, did I pronounce it correctly?
Naj Nagy.
Naj.
Everything is good.
Okay, welcome.
Hi. I have some notes. I'm just going to use the computer.
If you could speak right into the microphone.
Yes.
Like that.
Testing, 1, 2, testing. So my name is Dr. Lisa Nagy, and I, first of all, agree totally with Patricia Burke and her wonderful testimony, as well as Christine and others who are suffering from electrical sensitivity, and support their statements fully. My testimony pertains to, I believe, 14 of the bills today that I read, so you can broadly just expand, because I deal with both chemicals and electrical exposure. I'm board certified in emergency and environmental medicine. I'm honored to be here today representing the American Academy of Environmental Medicine as their communication liaison. I would like to list a few of my qualifications to be presenting on the 14 bills above. I come armed with a letter of reference from the director of NIEHS, who's Linda Birnbaum. She recommended me for a presidential commission on healthcare and to teach at various medical schools and institutions about how to take an environmental history and to treat patients who are sick from these conditions. I'm on an NIH roundtable on building and health where we educate about the health effects of all sorts of environmental exposures inside buildings, including EMF with wiring, and this means basically non-ionizing radiation. As the vice chair of the Integrative Medicine Consortium, I represent the voices of thousands of like-minded physicians. I attended Cornell Medical College and undergrad went to the University of Pennsylvania. I never heard of electrical and chemical sensitivity in my training in these institutions, how illustrious they are. I developed these syndromes myself, and I almost died from the cellular damage caused to muscles and nerves, which is overlapping with environmental illness and develops sometimes into electrical sensitivity. Also, there are many neurologic conditions and autoimmune problems that have environmental roots, as illustrated by Dr. Miller this month from NIH. So he just published on autoimmune diseases and their environmental triggers. This is current scientific literature being produced by our government agencies. I worked on a panel at the CDC with Dr. Miller for 2 years. So if we had a commission that was able to look at the research and bring in experts on chemical and electrical exposure, that would be the best for society. We do not need a separate individual commission for each illness. It's really the theory of how we approach getting to the cause of illness. We're looking not at genetics and environmental exposure enough. Those are the two factors that we should be focusing on. Traditional medicine is not training us in this area. I've been working in the Massachusetts Medical Society for more than 7 years on these subjects. The Medical Society is coming around slowly, but the public is way ahead of the physicians. A great example is that x-rays were used in shoe stores in the 20s through the 50s. They would x-ray the toes of children to see if they were hitting the end of the shoe and if a larger shoe should be purchased. And even when the health effects were known, it took from the 50s to the 70s, for Boston, which was the last location to outlaw the use of x-rays on children for this purpose. 50 years of x-raying feet when we knew that the radiation was harmful. And now we're talking about different types of radiation, but we don't need to wait 50, 20 years to listen to people who have become sick, especially if we're physicians and we can explain it scientifically what we went through. Think how many people don't like the detergent aisle of the grocery store, perfume, smoke, diesel exhaust, and are irritated by the clothing tags on the back of their neck. These are common symptoms of mild environmental sensitivity that we all have in the room, especially your wives and daughters. Women have this syndrome 4 times more often than men. I never would have believed any of this either. I lost my ability to read for 3 years. My IQ dropped 50 points, although I still was working as an ER physician, until my arms were so weak I could no longer intubate, and the nurse had to pull up on the scope. Then I finally had to quit and go on disability. It is also important to know that there was a study in Europe that was on EMF exposure in pregnant women. 11,000 pregnant women were sorted as to how often they used the cell phone, and if they used it 3 times a day while they were pregnant, they had a 40% higher rate of ADD and autism in the children. And this study has been out for maybe 7 years. I just picked a couple of studies to mention. I'm almost finished. Okay. I'm trying to read slowly so I don't rush too much. So we're now in the unfortunate situation that well-meaning doctors are unable to see the patients quickly enough and take a good history. So they don't know the cause and effect relationship between the symptoms. AMA policy is 20 years out of date and states that environmental medicine is bogus and that chronic fatigue syndrome doesn't exist. So what I would say is that I testified at the Utility Commission and found Dr. Wahlberg's testimony right next to me incredibly invalid. He in fact said to me, I should probably switch sides after I testified. So you have to look at the financial motivations of people giving testimony and their genuineness. Are they altruistic? Are they being paid by somebody to be there? And then look at the people you've seen before you today and decide, should we be protecting the rest of society from the exposures on the list today, whether it be fluoride, radiation, and often mold exposure in the building is the chief contaminant.
Thank you, Doctor.
And the autonomic nervous system is often damaged, and this is creating the addiction to amphetamines and opiates in society. If I had more time, I'd explain. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, appreciate it, and feel free to share with us in writing.
Yeah, I'll give you the whole statement. Thank you very much.
I believe at this point we've heard from everyone who had requested an accommodation. Is that correct? Or did we miss anyone? Okay.
Are there any questions, or should I just go?
I think we're good. Thank you very much. I want to thank all of those who have testified or are just here in the hearing who have an electromagnetic sensitivity. We appreciate that it's difficult for you, and we appreciate you making the extra effort to come to the State House to so that your voices can be heard. Thank you. Representative Provost, was there something you still wanted to do?
Evidently, I had a panel coming up, but I did not realize that the members of the panel were here. So if you would be so good as to hear them now, Dr. Janet Aldrich from ComflmRegistry School, J. Seymour, and Casey Marvell.
Okay.
As I've testified, I will yield to.
So does he just choose names?
If you could just all introduce yourselves before you testify. Thanks.
It's 3 minutes, is that correct?
Yes, 3 minutes or less.
Should I go? My name is Doug Briggy. I'm a professor at Tufts University School of Medicine. Been there for 23 years. My areas of work are in occupational environmental health. I've had $8 to $10 million of NIH funding. I do research primarily in the last decade on highway and traffic-related air pollution, and have worked with some.
In the microphone. Very close.
Oh, okay.
I apologize.
All right.
Otherwise, it's very difficult to hear.
It's like being a pop singer or something. Okay. And so I'm here to say first just a couple of things to provide some underlying scientific credibility to the bill and to the subsequent testimonies, although I'm sure Wade will also add science to it. One thing is that particulate air pollution is, the scientific consensus is that it composes 3 of the top 10 public health problems in the world, and by far is the most significant environmental health problem in the world. And those 3 components are direct smoking, tobacco smoke, indoor solid fuel combustion, which is a minor problem in the United States, but a major problem in developing countries where people burn solid fuel inside their homes, and then ambient fine particulate matter, which comes primarily from power generation and transportation. And so that is, scientific consensus. I think it's very important to use that as a backup. And for me, what that means is that particulate matter is something we should all be much more concerned about. I think the public and policymakers and many other people are aware of other environmental problems to a greater extent than they're aware of particulate matter. And one of my goals, and I'm writing a popular science book about this to popularize it, is to raise awareness about particulate matter. The second thing I'd like to say is that there are kinds of particulate matter that are elevated right next to highways and busy roadways. Ultrafine particles have been the focus of our research. There's also black carbon and some other things. But I think the strongest hypothesis is that these ultrafine particles near highways are a particular concern. And while the larger particles, the fine particles, which are also very small, but they're larger than the ones we're talking about, are regulated at a federal level. The ultrafine particles are not. And so there really is a need for some local and state level action to look at this problem and begin to understand it and consider some remedies. The third thing is that there is a solid scientific base that says living next to highways and major roadways is associated with a whole bunch of adverse health effects, including respiratory effects, asthma in children, cardiovascular outcomes, and neurological effects. Increasing evidence of elevated levels of autism in children who are born and raised near highways. And then the last thing I'll say is that we have done 10 years of research working with Somerville, Boston, Chinatown, and other communities, the Puerto Rican community in the Boston area, on ultrafine particles and health, and have published over 35 scientific papers out of that research, the upshot of which is that we have seen associations between highly refined exposure estimates to ultrafine particles and mostly indicators of cardiovascular risk, blood markers, and blood pressure. And so locally in the Boston area, we have generated direct evidence, and we're one of a small number of studies worldwide that have looked at that, of associations between these ultrafine particles and health concerns. So I think it's time that the Massachusetts Department of Public Health got up to speed on this issue, that they educated themselves, that they issued some guidance and some recommendations regarding it. And I think this bill would be one way to get to that point.
Thank you very much.
Chairman Lewis, members of the committee, thank you for taking us out of turn. My name is Casey Arvell, and I'm the Director of Public Policy for the American Lung Association. We support this bill for many of the reasons that Dr. Brugge just mentioned. In fact, most of my testimony is based off of his research, so I don't want to repeat anything. But we're here because particulate matter it really does impact our most vulnerable populations, including children, the elderly, those with existing lung diseases like asthma and COPD. Our annual State of the Air report looks at both ozone and particle pollution by county to show the public kind of where they stand. But unfortunately, 7 of our 14 counties either have incomplete or do not actually have monitors to show what particle pollution is in their county. So we think that there's really a big gap here, and this bill would address it, and I thank the committee for their time.
Boy, that was efficient. My name is Wiggs Zamor. I'm a Somerville resident. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I've lived in Somerville for 30 years, worked on Assembly Square, New T-Stop, Green Line. But we use the public health data in our advocacy for those efforts, and started about 10 years ago to look at specifically highway pollution and health effects next to highway, finding from the public records in Massachusetts that Somerville and Chelsea had by far the most excess lung cancer and heart attack deaths in the state, even though they had low smoking rates. It wasn't research, we were just checking the records. Since then, we've worked with Doug Brugge and Tufts. I've also taught 10 years at Harvard School of Public Health and Medical School, transportation exposures and environmental exposures and analytic methods, working with Helen Sue and others, and also work with BU School of Public Health on practical work with their graduate students. I've given you a small handout, and so if you wouldn't mind flipping to the second page. Doug mentioned the global burden of disease. I would also mention that in the US, when Office of Management and Budget looks at the benefit from compliance with federal regulations, they find that over 80% of all potential benefit over cost in the US comes from singularly compliance with the fine particle regulations. All other regulations are less than 20% of the potential cost benefit for compliance with federal regulations. Now, we look mostly at very small particles, ultrafines near roadways. They are less recognized, but you can see on the second page that there have been some excellent studies in Western nations which are comparable to us. So top right of the second page is a great study from Vancouver, which included every single adult in the city and showed that those who live within 50 meters of a highway in Vancouver had more than 50% higher cardiovascular mortality than those who did not, and also that those who moved to and away from the highway had consistent responses to those house movements. Lower right is a lung cancer study from Stockholm. Every adult in the city showing similar effects, more than 50% increase in lung cancer death for non-heavy smokers in the whole city of Stockholm, for people with highest exposure to traffic pollution. On the upper left is an asthma study EPA considers causal from the Los Angeles area that shows roughly 100% increases in childhood asthma for kids who live and go to school near busy roadways. And in the lower left, an emerging area of great concern, a couple 100% increase in childhood asthma. This is not as nailed down because there haven't been as many studies. The third page is just particle sizes. I'm going to leave that. The fourth page repeats some of these things I've said, and then how you go about determining the size of the exposure and practical methods. Fifth page is some work we've done with Tufts and Kresge Foundation on defensive tactics that can be taken in these situations. And then the last page is progress, regulatory and legislative progress in other parts of the United States. Top one is from Switzerland, but 6 of these are from California, where they're a little bit more advanced than this. So I just would urge you to help us get together with the Department of Public Health, with the environmental health experts within state government, so that we can have a common understanding of the standards that should be applied and move on toward practical implementation of defenses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a few questions. The first one is, so as I understand, the legislation talks about essentially 3 different types of particulate matter. Is that right?
Yep.
Particulate matter, fine matter, and ultrafine. Are there sort of standard definitions that exist? We're not creating new definitions. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Those are under federal law?
Yeah. So federal law regulates PM10 and PM2.5. PM10 is 10 microns and smaller. PM2.5 is 2.5 microns and smaller. The 2.5 is important because that's the size that's respirable and will get deeper into your lungs. The ultrafine particles are a little more, there's not a federal regulation. The convention, the standard in the field is to define them as 0.1 microns and smaller, or 100 nanometers and smaller, although there is a little variation on that in the scientific literature at least.
So for the larger particles, I'm sorry, I forgot conditions you said, but the larger ones that are regulated, under what federal agency?
It's the US CPA.
It's the EPA.
Right. There are national ambient air quality standards for both PM10 and PM2.5.
And can you say a bit more about federal efforts around any sort of standards for the ultrafine particulates? I assume that the discussions at the federal level.
Wig and I attended.
What has been the sort of the arguments, if you will, around extending regulations?
I'll say a little bit and then I'll let Wig continue. But we both attended the EPA's ultrafine workshop. What was it, 2.5 years ago? And so there's growing evidence base. I have a student who is doing a systematic review of the literature and has found over 100 studies already, and I think is still building the evidence base for this. So there's a lot of evidence. But my sense is that in the current political climate and situation, the odds of new federal environmental regulations are very slim to non-existent.
Yeah, so I actually was at the first multi-day ultrafine conference in the United States in Los Angeles about 10 years ago, and I have been to US EPA's science headquarters in North Carolina many times. EPA is very aware of and working on near roadway health effects, like near highways. It presents a dilemma for them because they have to open up a different toolbox. They have to get into land use decisions. What do you do about housing or schools or hospitals or parks right next to highways? And so far, although they are very good researchers and collaborators on the study area, they have been reluctant to jump into that with both feet because it would be a sea change. Fine particles are a regional gradient. They are not a local gradient. We measure many, many different pollutants in our studies, including ultrafine and fine particles, black carbon, gases. The particles are the ones that have the health effects at all sizes. They're retained more within the body. They carry the toxins in. They tend not to be exhaled. But EPA so far has been reluctant. There's only one national standard, and that's in Switzerland for ultrafine particles, and that's about 10 years old.
Okay. Along those lines, thank you, that was very helpful. Is there any other state that has said statewide? I know that set certain rules around schools and others.
Yeah, so
State said statewide.
So I can take a stab and then hand off on that. As our energy codes and the incorporation of energy codes into buildings have gotten more stringent, there are a lot of regulations, especially for housing, calling for all of the air to be filtered mechanically that comes in and out of buildings. It saves energy, and you have some control over the cleanliness of the air. Different states have enforced that or moved to put enforcement in place with a different degrees of vigor. So in California, they're extremely aware of the connection between these energy codes, the mechanical ventilation, and the piggybacking upon them of protective health measures. So Los Angeles, for example, requires very high efficiency air filtration for every home within 1,000 feet of a major roadway. And similarly, they have retrofitted all of the public schools between the ports and downtown Los Angeles with very high efficiency air filtration as well as gas filtration, but mostly focused on the particles. So they would be the premier example. I think we're a leader actually for the northeastern US. The study of these pollutants that vary greatly in small distances and over time at small time increments are harder to study than the regional pollutants, and we've done a pretty good job on that, and that's why we are one of the only groups in the world to show a causal relationship or a significant relationship between people's proximity to ultrafine particles in Somerville and cardiovascular inflammation.
That was very good, Wig. I would just add, which is ironic because you're from Somerville, that the city of Somerville has a zoning ordinance that we have worked with them to develop that is under consideration. My understanding is it's with the lawyers to determine whether it's allowable under zoning laws, which I don't understand at all. But basically, it would require something similar to Los Angeles,
right,
where housing that's built close to the highway or to major roadways would have to have protective measures to reduce the particle pollution that's getting into the housing. And it's different than Los Angeles in that it's a performance standard because it's zoning. So we allow the developers to do anything that works to reduce the levels. Although I think Wig and I would agree, air filtration is the obvious top choice for dealing with it.
And we expect it to be very collaborative.
Okay. And you mentioned this several times. Just to clarify, is the main issue we're dealing with proximity to highways? That's the main source of the ultrafine particulate matter?
Yeah, in urban areas, transportation is the main source of the ultrafine particles, and the levels of ultrafine particles, and there are dozens and dozens of studies, including ours, and we could send you those studies that show that if you're in the very close to highways or major roadways, 100, 200 meters, then your exposure to these particles is dramatically higher than further away.
Yes, I understand that, but I'm just trying to, are there other sources that you're particularly worried about, or is this really about?
So there are other sources. Our focus has been transportation, but there are other sources. There are indoor sources, so people generate these when they're cooking or smoking or burning candles indoors. Restaurants we've encountered recently are substantial local point sources of ultrafine particles, but really in an urban area, the biggest exposure, unless you have smoking inside your home, is going to be the transportation.
Could I make one add-on comment?
Yep. Again, so when you say transportation, you're talking about highways, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Highways and major roadways.
So I can add a little bit to that. The most common exposures for people in a metropolitan area are roadway exposures. Major airport is a great concern. Not that many people live really close to major airports. We do research in that area. We do find ultrafine particles from Logan when the wind is blowing in the right direction quite a ways away, but the wind is variable. For people who live within 100 meters, 300 feet of a highway, low winds, both sides of that highway are getting very high exposures, and over the course of a year they're very high. And large stationary sources like big power plants, big manufacturing plants are much easier to control. You can control the combustion and you can control the cleanup of it with smokestack techniques, and that's why the Clean Air Act in 1970 really went after those stationary sources first. And then if you think about our modern lifestyles, the combustion exposure that is hardest to get away from is how we get around in the city.
Resident next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to everyone who's testified. And thank you for all the work that you've been doing on this, which I know this is really accurate to what really brings home what I think is a very significant issue.
Yeah.
We're paying more attention to. I also want to thank Representative Rose, who's been a tireless champion on this issue here in State House. There's a lot in what you said. There's a lot that you've given us, so I'm going to take that and spend some time looking at it. I just had one specific question that I hope you can answer now, which is that I see that among the various measures that you listed here toward the end of your materials, there's reference to vegetation as one of the design tactics with potentially strong pro-benefits.
Yes.
Can you just say a little bit about what
Yes.
vegetation does? Is it just a barrier, or is there something about vegetation that somehow
Sure.
how the
So first of all, access to green space and to a certain extent to blue space, water, is healthy for a lot of different reasons. But in this case, we're looking at it as a barrier. So that happens to be a list I came up with working with Doug and Tufts and urban designers from Boston, and specifically a postdoc that we had then, who's now at Health Effects Institute, that does the accountability studies for EPA in the US. She came up with the same list and roughly the same benefits potential. With regard to near roadway barriers, EPA's Mobile Labs has done a lot of work in parallel to our thinking about it and the research about it more generally. Solid barriers that also have a green component seem to be the most effective. For a green component to be effective, you really need to be able to steer the air from the highway or other intense source away from the housing. So if you have gaps in a green barrier, then the air pollution is going to stream through those, just like you might have a flood and you have a dam open and the water would stream through that opening in the dam. So green barriers can be effective on their own, but they have to be very continuous and very solid.
But just so I understand, so the vegetation is simply another form of
Yes,
barrier,
that's right.
movement of the park.
That's right.
And then, again, forgive my ignorance, what happens to the particles? They hit the barrier and
Sure.
they go.
So the best thing to do with these kinds of local exposures is to throw them high up into the air where they get dispersed most easily. So the barrier tends to protect especially the residents and buildings that are closest to the barrier, especially if the barrier is relatively high compared with the buildings. Like single-family homes, triple deckers next to a highway, if you have a barrier, it can physically throw the air up and over to a great extent. Now, if you get 500 meters away, a kilometer away, half a mile away, there's probably no difference. But by that time, the intensity of exposure will have reduced quite a bit. Basically, this is an issue for the first 100 meters or so and the first 2 minutes or so of exposure. If you're not in that zone by distance or time, your exposure is going to be much less.
Let me just say, I think part of what you may be reacting to is that there is a point of view out there that plants are going to be the solution to reducing air pollution, both indoors and outdoors. And in my opinion, and I think Wing would agree with me, and I think the evidence supports it, that's a fairly strong exaggeration. Just having plants around and waiting for the particles to absorb onto the leaves, some of that happens, but it's a very small effect. It's not the kind of effect you get from building a solid wall or having efficient filtration of the air inside in an interior space.
It's too much to ask of a leaf to take 100,000 particles per cubic centimeter every 3 seconds out of the air.
You do obviously, and more and more are installed sound barriers on the sides of highways.
Right.
For different purpose. But do they serve any benefit here?
Yes, they can. And the highway design makes a difference too. If a highway is in a slot in the ground, then that tends by itself to throw the air up vertically, which is better. In Somerville, for example, Interstate 93 3 is up in the air 1 story. That's the absolute worst situation from an air pollution point of view, because you have that air pollution going straight into the neighborhood with very little retarding it as it goes through the neighborhood. So, yes.
Just one nuance that I think people, when they hear sound barriers and blocking the air pollution, somehow our minds go to the idea that the wind is going to be blowing perpendicular to the sound barrier all
Right.
the time. And in Los Angeles, you could actually make that happen. The wind is pretty consistent. But in Boston, the wind direction
Right.
is in different directions at different times. And they're much less or even inefficient or not efficient if the wind is coming down the highway, parallel to the highway, and along the sound barriers, for example. So there is a little bit of nuance to how they work and what makes them work best. But I would agree with Wade. On the whole, sound barriers are also a way of reducing pollution for people right next to the highway.
Okay. Could I add 1/2 sentence on that? So noise is also a stressor in common with the air pollution, and we're starting to spend more time on that. So the sound barrier has the added benefit of reducing the noise as well. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for your testimony.
For taking this panel.
Okay, so
Thank you all.
we're going to now start with the first bill on the docket today, and then we'll work our way down. So first bill is House 1131, and we have a number of people signed up for this bill. First up is, let's see, we have a panel, Diane Turco, Elaine Dickinson, Susan Mursky, and a full person, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble making out the names. Mueller last name?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. You're up.
Talk about all the Pilgrim bills, or are you taking them one at a time?
No, all the bills you'd like to testify on, you can do, all within your 3 minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, great. My name is Diane Turco. I live in Harwich, and I'm the director of Cape Town Windows. And we are here to speak with Boston Down Windows to support H1133, an act relative to radiological air monitoring, H1131, an act increasing nuclear power plant protection to 20 miles, including Barnstable County, Dukes and Nantucket, and Cape Ann. H1147, an act relative to radiological emergency response funds to increase monitoring. Senate 1185, an act relative to timely notification of releases of radiation real-time monitoring. And S1250, an act relative to public safety that would emergency directors within 20 miles would learn of an accident at Pilgrim, and an act relative to nuclear power plant protections. And we urge that there an enactment, a favorable vote out of committee. But I want to thank you very much. In the last legislative session, you did pass H2031 that increased the nuclear power plant protections to 50 miles, and that would have included Boston and Providence. Right now, you know, there are 2 emergency planning zones according to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And Boston, Metro Boston, is in the 50-mile ingestion pathway zone right now. But we're looking at Pilgrim. We're talking about Pilgrim. It's the worst nuclear reactor operated in the United States according to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for the 3rd consecutive year. And it's still 1 step from federally mandated shutdown. The spent fuel pool at that reactor is another imminent threat. It is, according to the Union of Concerned Scientists, with their Princeton colleagues, they completed a study that found if there was a fire at that spent fuel pool, the damage would go from Manhattan all the way up to Nova Scotia. And this is a real threat. Right now, the emergency plans call for evacuation of people within 10 miles. This bill would push it out to 20 plus Barnstable County. So it's a little less than what had passed in committee. So we're hoping that you've already vetted the 50 miles, that this should go pretty easily. I just want to say that right now, Barnstable County, in Barnstable, there are no plans. And this is our Barnstable County emergency directors put this brochure together of what we should do in the event of an accident. Shelter in place, that gives you 2 hours of protection. And we all have potassium iodide pills on Cape. You folks in Boston don't have any of that, and we're the same distance.
So I just want to read one statement. This was from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, February, I'll be giving you all these materials, February 14th, 2017 report, in which they said that Entergy did not adequately implement the process of planning, controlling, and executing work activities such that nuclear safety is the overriding priority. The NRC isn't going to protect us. We need you to do that. We need the expansion of the emergency planning zone because the threat is real. Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen and ladies. Again, thank you for taking the time to listen to our testimony. My name is Elaine Dickinson, and I am also from Harwich, Massachusetts, and a member of Cape Town Winders. I want to speak about two bills, Senate Bill 1185 for real-time monitoring on the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant. Connecticut passed in 2008 legislation that protects, that monitors the release of radiation from millstone. I feel like our legislators in Massachusetts owe us the same type of protection to give us real-time monitoring. There are routine releases, okay, of radiological nuclides, okay? It's part of the general operation. And right now, we do not have adequate monitoring.
That's next one.
Okay, so,
Just pass that.
all right, so the copy of this Connecticut thing will be given to you in written testimony. The other bill, 1133, okay, shows the woefully inadequate monitoring currently. There's a great big spot there that is like a dead zone.
This is all a dead zone. There's no radiological.
There's nothing monitoring that whole
out
area.
this way.
So we support Representative Cantwell's legislation to increase the money for that to not less than $500,000 to get some monitors in there. I think the people of Massachusetts are owed that. And listening to all the testimony previous today about all of the things that we're being exposed to, and you people are part of the Legislative Committee on Health, Public Health, and I noticed that there's only like half of you here today, so I hope what you've gleaned from all of the testimony you share with your colleagues. And it's a great responsibility that you have. I mean, knowing the history of what we've all been exposed to in the past, starting with the tobacco and x-ray on our feet, you know, it's like we need you, okay? All the other things that were spoken of, the state has control over it, but the radiological stuff, it's all federal. But there are a few things that state legislators have some jurisdiction over, and the health right now is one of them. So we plead with you to do your job for the people of the state. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Susan Mirsky from Boston Down Winders, and I too, listening to the previous testimony about particulates in the air, about radiation, the dangers of relying on corporate scientists. Yes, they're all related, and you are here to help us and protect us. So you have a big job ahead of you. I'm in support of Kathleen O'Connor Ives' bill 1250. The department shall promulgate regulations mandating nuclear power plants to notify fire and police departments within a 20-mile radius in the event there is a radiological malfunction at the plant. I think this is, I hate to say like a no-brainer, makes absolute common sense. Living in Newton, at 38 miles from Pilgrim, boy, I sure want my fire and police departments to know what's going on. So, help us.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you. My name is Guntram Mueller. I'm a professor emeritus of mathematics at UMass Lowell. I'm also the chair of Boston Down Winders. And the reason we call it downwinders is because Boston is 35 miles away from Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, and when the wind blows in this direction, it is downwind of Pilgrim. Sometimes people think, well, isn't Pilgrim going to close in a year and a half? Well, it is scheduled to close in a year and a half. And people quite naturally think, oh, well, that means the danger is going to go away in a year and a half. No, the danger will stay. The danger is largely in the spent fuel pool. Now, let me explain things a little bit. When the plant will close, in other words, when the reactor will be deactivated, the spent fuel in the reactor will be put into the spent fuel pool. It will be hot, very thermally hot, for another 5 years or so, and it will be highly irradiated for many thousands of years. So even though it's no longer as hot, it'll still be very, very radioactive. So since it is sitting in this pool, it is very vulnerable to sabotage or to attack. You know, after 9/11, people said, how could we know a plane can fly into a building? Well, now we know a plane can fly into a building, and if a plane were to fly into the spent fuel pool, it would very likely crack the fuel pool, the water would flow out, and according to certain studies, in a matter of a few hours, you would have this tremendous fire. And it's not a fire like a wood or coal fire. This is a much, much hotter fire. It would melt the cladding off the spent fuel, and the fuel would be turned into a gas which goes up and goes into the open air. A disaster of the first magnitude. So what we're asking in this Bill 1147 is to keep the current evacuation and emergency measures in place until the spent fuel has been taken out of the spent fuel pool and put into the much safer dry cask storage. Now the industry is reluctant to do that. Of course, it costs money, but it makes things much, much safer. And like I say, in Bill 1147, we'd like to keep that those emergency provisions in place until the spent fuel pool is empty. Now, you might think, oh, who is going to attack this thing? Well, you know, the Pentagon was worried enough to fund a study on this thing. And here's a little thing to think about. In Osama bin Laden's diaries, he talks about the possibility of going after nuclear power plants. So this is not out there. This is a real thing that could happen. So I urge you all to think favorably of these things we've mentioned and to vote them out of committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from the committee members? Okay. Thank you all. We
Okay, thank you.
appreciate your testimony,
Thank you so
all the
much.
hard work you've done. Thank you. The talks were very helpful. We'll share that with the committee and invite you.
And these will be in the testimony.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay. Representative Harris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, appreciate the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I'll be very brief in the interest of time. I'm here in support of House Bill 2473 by Representative Sarah Peak, resolved to establish a commission to study the health impacts from a land-based wind turbines to protect the health of the citizens of the Commonwealth. I've been working with my friend and advocate, Louise Grabowski, and also I want to mention Maurice Samos, who's in the audience, two strong advocates from my district, and I was going to turn it over to them to talk on that legislation.
Thank you, Representative Ayers, for your support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Louise Grabowski. I'm from Quincy, Massachusetts. I'm the president of Windwise, Massachusetts, but today I'm speaking personally. Here are some of the reasons why I support the creation of a wind turbine health impact study commission. And in listening to testimony today, I realize there are many parallels among the bills today. This one has to do with noise pollution. In Massachusetts, there are over 21 locations where there are wind turbines, and the people living near them are reporting various health problems and complaints, many of which stem from sleep deprivation, which is common in that situation. But the problem and the reason for this legislation is there has really been no state or local investigation or study or promotion of research into these issues and the health problems. So if this commission determines that it's warranted and feasible, which is in the bill, this bill would provide for that boots on the ground kind of research that we need with experts and get an honest study and help educate medical professionals also. Medical providers aren't generally aware of this issue, and in fact, wind turbines can make people sick, as we have learned all across the Commonwealth since Fellman turbines went in 2012. They've since been taken down, they're not removed yet, but the judge this summer did, based on nuisance, shut both of those turbines down. So some things are going through the courts right now, but we also need the help of the state on this issue. Representative Peake modeled this bill after the Lyme Disease Commission, which I know some of you worked on that in the past, and that was very successful. It helped to create educational materials for healthcare professionals as well as the public. Likewise, we'd like to see a commission to study the health impacts of wind turbines, and we think it could make significant advances to protect public health. The commission, interesting, includes members of the public. When the health study bill was done by DEP, DPHU, members of the health public were not involved, especially wind turbine neighbors, nor were they studied, nor were they even spoken to. So an appropriation is not necessary under this bill, which is a good thing. Some members of the commission would be volunteers, and the commission is also tasked with investigating grants and federal funding for this. And they will just take that, get some funding, and with that determine whether it's feasible and it's warranted to support wind turbine health impacts research in the Commonwealth. I don't see what we have to lose. Thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Marie Davis, Quincy, Mass. It's interesting, I'm working from 2015 notes when we came requesting essentially the same health study. And I think the time has come. In 2008, we were also eager to fight climate change, that I think we did some legislation without thinking, even though if you check, you'll find that as far back as the 1980s, it was known that wind turbines had health impacts. There was very little done. Global warming, cooling actually, then global warming came along, and the solution was going to be renewables, wind turbines, solar. We kind of were all maybe too eager to move forward without doing the groundwork and building a foundation based on health impacts first. And it seems to apply to a lot of what I've heard here today. So I think the time has come for this particular study to start and determine what is wrong with industrial wind turbines that we have victims, and go from there. I don't have much more to add. There are other people here that would like to address it.
Thank you all very much. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that the Department of Public Health a number of years ago did do a study on this exact issue.
All right. If you go back to that study, the one thing that I would like to say is we had victims at that time. They used aged information, if you will, health studies or research that were done over the years by various experts in the field, and they relied on that. But think of what a wind turbine was way back, even when we first started, 300 feet.
Yeah.
Well, we're approaching 600. God knows what they might put in our Atlantic Ocean. So we really have to look at it a lot closer than we ever have before.
May I add to that a little bit? Oh, thank you. I'll be brief. Oops. Thank you. Okay, there was a health impact study, and I can understand why you asked why. Kind of like, well, we did that. Well, we didn't really do it. At the time, turbines that were studied, and only 4 or 5 peer-reviewed pieces of literature were studied. This was a desktop study. Turbines at the time were only 164 to 213 feet tall in the studies that they looked at to say they didn't find a direct connection between wind turbine noise, mainly low frequency, and health. But today we have on the South Shore, out west, we have turbines 400 to 500 feet tall. The latest ones are 500 feet tall and they're 2 megawatts. So you have that past research, and what Marie is saying, yeah, it's kind of an apples and oranges. And in 2012, when the study came out, you had Falmouth, then you had Kingston, the next one was Fairhaven, and it moved along. We didn't really have the basis of knowledge in the Commonwealth. And now we do, and now we have seen problems proliferate, and that's the reason why we need the study. We didn't have the, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hall, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
I just had a point relative to your question.
When you come up to testify, you can make it.
Okay, can you remember that one, all of us?
Yes. Okay.
I'll try it.
Thank you.
There are 2 more here. Do you want to go?
No, I took you as a courtesy to Representative Ayers.
Thank you.
Because typically we don't typically do that. That was a courtesy to him. All right, we need to go back to the bills that we were hearing previously, which is bills related to, well, first House 1131 and then related bills related to nuclear power plants. Next, we're going to hear from a panel that includes Janet Aldrich, sorry if I mispronounced your name, David Agnew, Bruce Howe, and Claire Miller.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Miller was not feeling well and she's left.
I'm sorry to hear that. Please let her know that we'd like to receive her testimony in writing.
Thanks, sir.
All right, welcome, and whenever you're ready.
Okay, and you did very well on my name, thank you. Janet Aldrich. I'm a member of the Pilgrim Legislative Advisory Coalition, which advocates the protection of the economic, environmental, and safety interests of all Massachusetts citizens through responsible public policy on nuclear energy. I ask each of you to support there are 6 bills that are before you that speak to every area that brought our diverse group together with common concerns about the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station. A number of them have been mentioned. I just quickly will say that they are Representative James Catwell's 1133 and 1131, Senator O'Connor Ives' Senate Bill 1250, Representative Peake's House Bill 2472, and a Representative Cutler's bill and I don't have the number here. Yes, I do. It is 1147, sorry. And lastly, Senator Sears' bill, 1185, co-sponsored by legislators from both sides of the aisle and both branches, and they are within the purview of the state to enact and regulate. Energy, the owner of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant, will argue that they are not, that the laws would be preempted by federal regulation. I would like to say that this is not completely true, and it would behoove you, each of you, to research this legal area in your consideration to support. In the past, certain decisions have been questioned, and a primary focus of those who have denied passage of legislation such as this. The citizens of Massachusetts, your constituents, deserve the time spent in reading the law. The Atomic Energy Act of 1983 and decisions hence made in our courts recently as 2015, reaffirmed by then Judge, but now Justice Gorsuch, in Cook versus Rockwell International Corporation, states that the NRC has the sole authority and responsibility over nuclear safety regulations, which is only with the construction and operation of a nuclear power plant. The NRC does not purport to exercise the authority based on economic considerations. Massachusetts may decide how nuclear generation fits into the state's overall energy and land use plan, and may regulate a nuclear power plant to address its own economic concerns. The Supreme Court has been clear: a state or local law whose rationale is grounded in economic purposes lies outside the occupied field of nuclear safety regulation. That is within the purview of the states, and that's why, by and large, the bills I've mentioned, that's what they do for the Commonwealth. I thank you all for giving us this opportunity to present our concerns and our statements. Thank you.
Greetings, thank you. My name is David Agnew. I'm also a co-coordinator of the Pilgrim Legislative Advisory Coalition. Regarding preemption, I just wanted to also say that protecting citizens after an accident is not only the state's right, but it is their duty. Referring to radiological emergency planning, 5 years ago, MEMA Director Kurt Schwartz addressed citizens and emergency managers on Cape Cod and said, quote, "MEMA embraces the need for enhanced planning on the Cape." He went on to say that there was no evacuation plan for the Cape, but that there would be relocation. Quote, "We would seal off all the roads in and out. We would send people into these areas with protective clothing and help everybody relocate out. We would move animals and anything living, we would move out. And the unfortunate reality, which is what Fukushima faces today, is that this area may well be closed to anyone for years to come." That was 5 years ago. Since then, there has been much discussion, which has led to greater awareness, but little, if any, change in official emergency preparedness planning. Frankly, Plymouth was a very poor location to site a nuclear reactor. Most everyone on Cape Cod has long known that there is no escape from the Cape. H 1131 is a common sense idea. I think I may have failed to mention, this is Cantwell's bill. Representative Cantwell. H 1131 is a common sense idea that is 45 years overdue. The present legal fiction, no part of Cape Cod is in the inhalation pathway zone, means that, according to the official wisdom, somehow particulate matter from an atmospheric plume would accumulate on the ground without ever being inhaled. That's been preposterous from its inception in 1972. Presently, there is no off-site radiological monitoring to provide guidance to MEMA, MDPH, the Outer Cape, or the communities surrounding Seabrook, and H 1131 would begin to address that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the panel, Ms. Keefe. I'm going to go off script a little bit here in my 3 minutes because it's an odd moment for a citizen to sit in front of a panel like this practicing democracy. And that's what we're doing, is we formed a government 300 years ago before there was a light bulb, and now we're trying to figure out what to do with nuclear power plants. Okay? So I want to remind you that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. No matter how small you think this risk is, it is not non-existent. There have been 8 major nuclear events at the 40 licensed facilities that use this same Mark III reactor. That's 1 in 8. You want to gamble with 1/8 of the property of the Commonwealth and half of the citizens being exposed to toxins, not being able to return to the Cape forever? Come on, I mean, let's be real. This is unlikely, I grant you, but not impossible. So what do we do as citizens and as representatives to try to prevent this? And I call your attention to just one of the bills here, which is 1147. 1147, to my way of thinking, is simply saying, if after the closure, any fuel that isn't in dry cask and causes a problem that we have to fix, you have to pay for. That's all it's saying. It doesn't cost the Commonwealth a penny. It's not about nuclear safety. It's not about the operation of the nuclear power plant. It's just saying, look, we're the legislature. We're protecting our economic interests, our environmental interests, our citizens' interests, our economic interests. If you people screw up, we want you to know you're going to pay. And if you know that in advance, maybe you'll take a little more care. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
May I present this?
Absolutely.
For record?
All right, let's see. I think next up is Tom Joyce. Mr. Joyce, are you here? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Committee on the Joint Committee on Public Health. My name is Tom Joyce. I appear here today on behalf of Entergy Corporation, a company located in New Orleans, Louisiana, that owns 11 nuclear power plants across the country, including, in case in point, the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station in Plymouth. I would like to record, very simply record, Entergy in opposition to the 6 bills that have been previously mentioned here in the previous testimony. Again, the federal preemption, you've heard talk about that already by previous speakers here today. We argue without question that federal preemption does apply to the size of the emergency planning zone and certainly to radiation and other matters relative to the operation of nuclear power plants. And the NRC has taken that under consideration. Furthermore, that's to make it clear, Entergy works very carefully with the emergency management agency here in Massachusetts and the Department of Public Health, providing real-time monitoring of radiological releases around the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant, and also relative to funding the towns within the 10-mile zone their emergency preparedness plans. That is done to the tune of somewhere around $3.5 million annually. I am pleased that one of the members of one of the panels that had spoken earlier did tell you that, in fact, the plant is closing in about 17 months. At that point in time, the nuclear fuel, which is in the reactor and is the most at risk of any part of that nuclear power plant, will be removed from the reactor at the end of May, beginning the 1st of June in 2019. It will be put into the spool after a cooling off period. It will be put into the spent fuel pool. Immediately, they will be starting to put the spent fuel into dry cask storage around the plant on casks that have been approved by the federal government. So with that, I would just like to say that I think that the legislation, however well-intended, is unnecessary, and that Entergy would like to ask you to, as you consider and do your due diligence on these bills, that you have heard most of them in the past, that you will, in the end result, report them unfavorably. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Questions?
I
nuclear,
I'm sorry.
when you said the fuel is to be stored in dry gas, did you say ground? Where is that?
It's going to be stored on, they've already started storing fuel. Interestingly enough, the dry gas storage science has developed a great deal over the past years since they started to close and decommission nuclear power plants. The first of which was the first one that was ever built, and that was in Row, Massachusetts, the Yankee Row atomic plant you may have heard about. And that fuel is still today, it remains in dry gas storage on the site, and will remain there until the federal government, which it has promised to do, takes the fuel and puts it into a federal repository once it declares where that may be. But as far as the fuel is concerned, I think there are now 6 casks that contain, I think a total of 600 spent fuel rods presently at the plant site that have been approved. And the plan is to get all of them into dry casks just as quickly as possible. I don't think there's any secret that Entergy would like to decommission as fast as they possibly can. You've heard talk, perhaps by other panels or other persons in the past, that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission allows up to 60 years for decommissioning. That is in fact correct. I think the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has stated recently that the average of the decommissioning of the plants that have decommissioned since the beginning is about 12 to 15 years. So I think it's pretty unrealistic to think it's going to take 60 years. We certainly hope that it isn't, and we hope that in fact it's going to be a great deal less than 12 or 15 years. The faster the better, as far as Entergy is concerned. I hope I've answered your question. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Henrietta Cosentino?
Hi. Hi. Thank you so much for hearing me today. I'm not going to present you with a lot of statistics or any visuals, and I do not have written testimony. I'm not here representing a group. I'm representing residents at what I call ground zero. That is where I live. We are within 5 miles of Pilgrim. And every night I wake up and think about the radiation exposure plume. We live on a lake, a pond, with very ferocious and changeable winds. And it is, I think you understand now that radiation is born on the wind. So there is no telling where it's going to go unless you can follow the wind. And this is one of the reasons I'm here in support of each of the bills, the 6 bills that have been referred to. A couple of them deal with expanding the radiation, the evacuation zone from 10 to 20 miles. Some of them deal with having more radiological monitoring. All of this is very, very sensible. Because without a thorough monitoring of the daily radiation releases and or of releases that happen after a major incident, there isn't really a very reliable way to deal with the health situation. So this, of course, involves money, and money is what Entergy does not want to spend. And Entergy will argue, and has argued twice when I've been here, by their paid lobbyist, that this is unrealistic and unnecessary, and that the state does not have the right to do this. But as you will read, and as you will hear from others who have submitted written testimony, the fact is that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts actually does have some authority to assess funding for post-radiological situations, for things that do not involve the plant and its setup exactly. And I am very, very proud of our representatives, each of them, Cantwell, Cutler, Peak, I probably don't have all their names, but Senator Sear, they're doing their jobs. They're trying to be creative in finding ways for the Department of Public Health to fulfill its mission to protect us in the most responsible way. Now, I wake up every night thinking about the radiological plume because I'm within 5 miles of Pilgrim. But the fact is that everybody within 50 miles of Plymouth should be thinking about that. And the only reason they don't, I'm not going to say we because I do, but even the majority of people in Plymouth unfortunately do not think about it because they can't deal with it, because it's scary, because they're in denial, and that's a fact. We're all in denial about the dire situation of nuclear energy, particularly in the Mark I boiling reactor, because as somebody previously on the panel pointed out, there have been 1 in 8 of these reactors has already failed. That's very poor chances, actually. That's a substantial risk. It's not like 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a million. The Mark I boiling water reactor is unreliable. So I implore you to pass these bills. They are common sense. They will help the Commonwealth of Massachusetts fulfill its duties, and they do not, they are entirely within the authority of the Commonwealth. So it's a no-brainer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There was anyone signed up to testify?
Yes, over here.
On 1131? Yes. Would you want to testify on House Bill 31? Okay. That's 1133. We're going to get to that next. But anybody else for House Bill 1131? 1131. Okay. We're going to close the hearing on 1131. Now we're going to move to House Bill 1133. And I know some people have already testified on this bill. That's fine. And we're going to hear from Mary Lampert and Rebecca Chin. Please. Good timing.
Perfect.
Go first. No, you're at 31. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Chin. I co-chair the Duxbury Nuclear Advisory Committee, and I'm a former co-chair of the Duxbury Board of Health. I'm here to speak in favor of House Bill 1133, and that the town of Duxbury also supports 1147, 1131, and 1185. For 1133, I'd like to say that the Massachusetts Department of Public Health has insufficient funds to perform its obligations today. Since 1992, Chapter 111, Section 5KE has authorized Mass Department of Public Health to assess nuclear power plants up to $180,000 per year to defray the costs of the Mass Department of Public Health's radiation control program. This amount has remained the same for 25 years, and it's simply not enough today. Their radiation control program consists of environmental monitoring and emergency preparedness when there is an accident or an event involving radiation release. This bill permits Mass Department of Public Health to assess the operators of the existing and proposed nuclear power plants during operations and post-closure enough money to do what current legislation requires the department to do. This amendment does not ask for taxpayer money. It corrects language, and it does not allow the licensee to dip into the decommissioning trust fund, and we urge your support.
May I skip ahead to 1147? Yes, I'm Mary Lampert, co-chair of the Nuclear Advisory Committee in the town of Duxbury, and have been asked by the selectmen of the town of Duxbury, as has Becky, to present their testimony. This bill deals with funding of emergency planning post-closure. As you'll note, it was signed on by representatives who represent each and every town within Pilgrim's emergency plan, 10-mile emergency planning zone. And that indicates its importance. What is important to note is the federal government, the NRC, has granted licensees who ask to be relieved of paying for off-site emergency planning after closure. They have granted that request, not established a regulation, but granted the request piece by piece. Entergy, for its Vermont Yankee plant, made the request. We expect, therefore, when Pilgrim closes, that they will do the same, and we hope legislation would be in place to discourage them from doing so. It would be very harmful to our community, to the host community, and the 5 towns, for example, and those within the 50 miles, not to have these monies. To Duxbury, what it would mean would be, we'd be short about $85,000 a year, plus we'd be short to replace equipment, plus we'd be short on training. In some of the other communities, such as Plymouth, they'd be short up to about $300,000 a year. Now, what are they going to do? Are they going to say, I know my citizens deserve and need protection? If there is a spent fuel pool accident that contains the equivalent of 700 atomic bombs, they know that they would be responsible to protect the community, but times are tight economically. They can't take it out of their budget. So what are they going to do? Tom Joyce suggested that somehow that stuff is going to get out of the pool faster than you can snap a finger. We expect it will probably take, at best, 7 years. Could be more. So this is an extended period of time to hit Entergy with a cost that should be simply a cost of their doing business. Tom Joyce, as you expected, as we expected, suggested, without naming any cases, mind you, that the Commonwealth does not have the authority. He is wrong. The Commonwealth has the authority. The Atomic Energy Act gave the NRC exclusive authority for safety issues only, and it reserved economic issues for the state. This bill deals solely with the economics of funding off-site emergency planning until the pool is emptied. That was affirmed by the Supreme Court in Pacific Gas and Electric, number 1, and it was then reaffirmed by Judge Gorsuch in Cook versus Rockwell International. I provided, and the town of Duxbury did, links to those cases. More importantly, the Commonwealth's right to enact this bill was later also explained by Judge Gorsuch in the Cook case by showing the federal government, Congress allowed the federal government to promulgate safety rules before the fact, that is, during the operations. However, after the fact consequences are reserved for the state. And emergency plans after there has been an accident is an after the fact case. And so just those 2 cases, and I listed maybe 5 or 6 others in the written testimony, indicate that unfortunately Joyce did not go to law school. My husband just recently retired from Wilmer, so we're in good hands there. And so this is a bill that's a no-brainer, doesn't cost the Commonwealth anything. Without it, it puts our emergency management directors in each of these towns in a terrible bind that is caused not by us, but by the operations of the reactor 6 miles from our high school.
Thank you very much, both of you. Very good. Okay, is there anyone else who would like to testify on House Bill 1133? House Bill 1133. Okay, we're going to move on then to House Bill 1147. We just bring testimony on it. House Bill 1142. House Bill 1147. Okay, moving on to House Bill 1172. House Bill 1172. Anyone else here on barber shops? No barber shops. Okay. House Bill 1192. Representative Lipsky's bill. We do have several people to testify on this bill. Janet Johnson, or I think Janet already testified, I believe, right? Janet's all set. Okay. Corinne Whitaker. Ms. Whitaker. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My testimony is in support of 4 bills today, the one regarding electric and magnetic fields, and also the other bills regarding the safe use of wireless technology in schools, and the commission to study the health effects of electromagnetic frequencies, or fields rather. I am a resident of Sherborne, Massachusetts, and my children attend the Dover-Sherborne Regional Schools. In September 2014, my neighbors and I led an effort to oppose the location of a cell tower on the Dover-Sherborne Regional Campus. In the process, we educated ourselves and our community about the known and proven dangers of radiation emitted by cell towers, Wi-Fi, cell phones, and other wireless devices. In addition, then and since then, I have met and spoken with people who suffer on a daily basis from significant adverse physiological effects caused by this radiation, and I have recently become aware of many young families in our town of Sherborne whose children suffer at school from this exposure. There are no federal laws or regulations that protect these, our most vulnerable, from this exposure. While FCC regulations set standards that are woefully inadequate, out of date, and not even enforced, no one is testing the levels of wireless radiation in the school environment. And the levels of this radiation have multiplied exponentially with the addition of more and more devices being used in the classrooms and the boosting of Wi-Fi signals to support those devices. My understanding is that EMF sensitivity is not something that you either have or don't have. It's something you can develop over time with exposure, so anyone is vulnerable, and children especially so because of their developing bodies and brains. Even more alarming is the significant credible research that shows that this technology will cause other more devastating medical issues down the road, including cancer, DNA damage, cognitive impairment, and serious fertility problems. Are we really willing to let our children be the guinea pigs for this technology? It is estimated that wireless radiation in our environment is now a quintillion times more than 30 to 40 years ago. I'm told that's the one with 18 zeros after it. And it continues to increase with every new device and every new generation of mobile technology. What is critical about these bills is not that they seek to eradicate the technology, but to study, determine, and apply the safe use of it. Indeed, application of the precautionary principle itself often leads to further innovation and technological alternatives and advances, a clear opportunity for the wireless industry. We collected over 400 signatures in opposition to the cell tower in our community and rallied those concerned to attend regional school committee meetings where the cell tower plans were eventually abandoned. But residents of our community continue to be concerned about the other and growing sources of radiation in our everyday environments, especially as it relates to those most sensitive, our children and the elderly. Wi-Fi in schools, smart meters on our homes, the rollout of 5G technology, more and more cell towers. I support these bills and sincerely hope that you will give them your most conscientious support. They will raise awareness and directly address the radiation to which our children are being exposed. Massachusetts is a leader in this nation. It should be at the forefront of fleshing out the dangers of this technology and protecting individuals who become chronically ill because of it. I ask you to please report out of committee favorably and promptly on these 4 bills. Thank you.
Same topic. I'll call you, sir. Okay, we've got a number of people signed up and call. Next up is Karen Rogers. Ms. Rogers. Hi.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Can everybody hear me okay? Should I speak up a little bit more?
Just like that, right into it.
Is that okay?
Very fine.
Is that better?
Stay close.
Super. Okay. Super. Thank you. Thank you very much for your careful consideration today of the current bill with Representative Linsky and the additional 3 bills that are up that tend to the electric and magnetic fields and the safe use of wireless technology in schools. My name is Karen Rogers, and I'm here to tell you about my concerns for those who suffer from electromagnetic sensitivity. One of them is my husband. He has significant sensitivity that began decades ago. We became aware of it when we were driving on the highway going under power lines. And again, that is specific to Representative Linsky's bill. My husband got severe pain in his head. As the years have gone on, he's continued to have issues with this. He gets problems with large metal electric transponders nearby, and it's continually made worse by Wi-Fi. Both of our children have symptoms as well. We try to ameliorate it daily with some success in our home, but the environment in my children's school, the Dover-Sherburne High School, greatly concerns me. In fact, the levels of Wi-Fi in all schools greatly concerns me. I would like to urge you to support all 4 bills, please, regarding electric and magnetic fields and the rapidly increasing amounts of radiation in public environments, especially our schools. All of this due to wireless technology. My belief is that this will prove detrimental to the health of many. Some know it now, some are growing to know it. Hardwiring is safer, it is less expensive, it is way more secure, but it's not practiced enough. Please support those bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Next is Lance McKee. Okay. We're coming up soon. You do it. Mr. McKee.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for these hearings. And well, my name is Lance McKee. I live in Worcester. I became aware of this electromagnetic field issue, health issue, through Patricia Burke, whom you heard talk earlier. And frankly, I thought she was a bit nuts at first, but I began studying the science. The more I read, the more amazed I become. I helped found the Open Geospatial Consortium, OGC, an important international information technology standards organization based in Wayland. I retired from OGC's staff last year. I then became an OGC member so that I could create a working group to look at better ways of sharing electromagnetic field data, sharing, integrating, and so on. I believe that if the commission is formed, that we've been discussing here, and if it completes its task, and if it's formed as described and not a commission influenced by industry, I believe that that commission will come to the same conclusions that I've come to, and that is that this represents a significant health threat. Cell phones, Wi-Fi, and so on. If it does come to those conclusions, there are opportunities in 2 areas for the state of Massachusetts. One is to build on the leadership that we've shown in good government and progressive thinking about environmental legislation, and do the things that have been discussed here regarding this today. There's another area of opportunity which people don't recognize, and that is that the science behind this whole issue is bioelectromagnetics. I attended, well, keep it short. The science needs help. There's plenty of science to justify what's been talked about here. But it's an extraordinary area poised for great growth. You know, we have chemical signaling, pharmaceuticals. Chemistry is all about electricity as well. These are all particles that are made of energy. The research shows that there's what it suggests, and it's you can begin to read about this if you just look at the science. There are credible opportunities for creating new technology businesses in Massachusetts by creating a platform for this research. I included a paragraph about that in my submitted testimony last week, and I'd be very glad to talk to any of you who are interested in what that research platform would be. Mary, I'll give you a call.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody else, we don't have anyone else signed up for this. Anyone else who wants to testify on House Bill 1192? House Bill 1192. Okay. Moving on to House Bill 1202. House Bill 1202. Anyone? Okay. Moving on to House Bill 1213. The provost bill, we heard testimony on that earlier. Anybody else for House Bill 1213? Okay, we're going to move on then to House Bill 2030, Rep. Dykeman's bill. We heard obviously some testimony on this bill, and we also have Laura Nellinson. Ms. Nellinson, are you still here? Laura Nellinson? Yes? Great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. The floor is yours.
I'm here today. Can you hear me okay? I'm here today as a concerned parent. I'm here to voice my concern over wireless radiation in our health, specifically our children's health. A couple of years ago, I didn't even think about wireless radiation and knew nothing about it until I had an assessment of my home for other reasons. I was concerned about the air quality because above my condo were heavy smokers. A building biologist did my home assessment. The air quality was fine. But what I was shocked to learn, she pointed out the high levels of radiation in my home from the iPad, the laptop, the wireless router, and my cordless phone. And this really prompted me to learn more about wireless radiation and the health risks. And I went on to find out that there's thousands of studies and a continually growing body of evidence about the health risk of wireless radiation. Cancer, infertility, behavioral changes, and sleep disorders, just to name a few. Children are most at risk from the health effects of wireless radiation because their nervous and immune systems are still developing. In fact, they absorb 80% more radiation than adults. But despite that, most of our children are sitting under industrial routers 5 days a week, 7 hours a day for 10 months out of the year. And this amount of radiation emitted by school industrial routers has been compared to the amount of radiation when you're sitting underneath a cell tower. I believe an important first step would be for the DESE to conduct measurements of the radiation levels in our Massachusetts schools. Measurements based on the biological non-thermal exposures limits, not the FCC's thermal limits, which are limits thousands of times higher than where science is showing harm. School districts throughout Massachusetts are beginning to examine this issue. My 11-year-old daughter attends Medway Public Schools, and I am very thankful to Superintendent Dr. Pyrus and Wellness Director Dr. Sherman for joining this conversation. However, Dr. Pyrus and Dr. Sherman, like so many other school officials in Massachusetts, are seeking guidance on this issue. Effective policies and procedures need to be put in place to provide safe technology in our classrooms. Connecting computers to the internet through hardwiring through Ethernet cables is a realistic and effective solution. The goal should be to begin transition to high wiring our schools
to cut down exposure levels immediately while we work out a plan for hardwiring in every school. There is absolutely no reason to have industrial routers blanketing not only our students but our staff in radiation. Creating a commission is vital in order to put a timely and effective action plan in place to protect all of our citizens based on the current science. Invoking the precautionary principle should also be a priority, especially with our most vulnerable population, our children. It is clear that much more needs to be done on the state level to protect our children and all of our citizens from the harmful effects of microwave radiation. Massachusetts has an incredible opportunity to lead the nation in creating solutions for safe technology in our schools as well as all of our public areas. Lastly, I would like to encourage you to view a showing of the new documentary Generation Zapped at your earliest convenience. This documentary reviews the current science, biological effects, and how wireless technology was brought to market without any safety testing. I have also asked my local library to sponsor a showing which will be done in January or February. Please support these 4 bills. It is vital to our children's health and everyone's health. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else who would like to testify on House Bill 2030? Representative Dyke, anyone else?
Right here.
On House Bill 2030? Yeah. Okay, please.
Hi, my name is Keith Marciniak from Pepperell, Massachusetts. I'm here today as a parent. So I'm just going to give you a quick 3 years of my life with microwave radiation and how it revolves around my kids and my school committee. So 3 years ago, actually probably 5 years ago, my wife comes home and says, how come we don't have Wi-Fi? Everyone does. I'm like, I don't know. I don't want that in my house. There's a gut feeling. I don't feel right about it. Oh, come on, everyone's doing it. All right, fine. I guess it's okay. I mean, the government would have protected us, right, if it was dangerous. So I'm sitting next to a Wi-Fi router for 3 years in my home office. You know, don't think about it. And then one day my 13-year-old nephew comes up to me and says, Uncle Keith, I'm on sleeping pills at night. I go, what are you talking about? You're 13. You got nothing to worry about, kid. Yeah, I just lay there all night. I can't sleep. I don't know what's wrong. So I started researching it, and sure enough, I know he's surrounded by cell phones and game controllers and cordless phones and Wi-Fi. Now, I'm going to see what his environment's like, and sure enough, insomnia is like one of the minimal things that biological effects that you can get. So I started researching the issue more and more, and I'm like, wow, I really feel behind the 8 ball on this. I'm like, I should have known this before I put it in my house. I should have researched it. I didn't. So I'm picking up my kids at school, and sure enough, I'm like, I wonder, they don't have Wi-Fi, do they? Oh, geez, like 5 wireless access points. I'm like, oh my God. So I went to my school committee, and the superintendent, and the director of technology, I met with them, and gave me information. They're like, yeah, we didn't know about this. Thank you for the information, nice to see you. 6 months go by, nothing's done. I started attending every single meeting at the school committee. Guys, this is the most recent studies. Just blank stares, never any questions. Okay, I got to bring it to the next level. That wasn't enough. So I think they got tired, sick of me talking to them. So they actually did their own research, and they talked to the Department of DESE, Department of Elementary Secondary Education, and they said that they follow the American Academy of Pediatrics. Well, I checked American Pediatrics, and they said they follow what the FCC, actually, they went to the FCC and said, hey, we need new guidelines. Okay. And finally, what their result was, my school committee, the school administrators told the school committee was, well, we can't guarantee 100% if the Wi-Fi is safe, but due to the lack of studies out there, we think the education that we get from the Chromebooks far outweighs the risk. Like, oh my God. Okay. So I contacted the DESE, and they said contact the Department of Health. Okay, so the DESE has no clue. They just installed this in every school in Massachusetts. 1 million kids are exposed, and they don't know it's safe. Okay, I contacted the Department of Health. Bob Nord tells me, we're not going to make a decision to tell you if Wi-Fi is safe. That's not our role. We have EMF fact sheets coming out. That was last year. I'm still waiting for those. So basically, in summary, I ran out. Okay. Time's up. We need you guys. I have not seen one adult group protect the children. It's all about, I don't know what the agenda is. I know it is for the school systems. They get rated by the Department of Education. The Department of Education is pushing Wi-Fi in schools, so they're afraid to say anything. You guys are our last resort as citizens. There's nothing else we can do except go out and do petitions, and it's going to come back to your doorstep. Please form a commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Appreciate all the research you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for House 2030, House 2030? I think you already testified.
So you can only speak once during the entire day.
Well, we've got a lot of people that still like to testify. Okay, next up then is House Bill 2472, Representative Pete's bill. We've obviously heard some testimony already. Have we already heard from Bonnie Shepherd? We have not. Ms. Shepherd, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Bonnie Shepherd from Wellfleet, Massachusetts. I represent Down Cape Downwinders, which is a citizens group that meets regularly in Wellfleet, representing some 250 to 300 people, but with the full support of, actually all the town meetings of all the Cape towns. And I'm speaking on behalf of 2472. And Down Cape Downwinders works in alliance with the organizations that have already testified, the Pilgrim Legislative Advisory Coalition and Cape Downwinders. This particular bill is of special interest to us because it would expand the emergency planning zone to include the cities and towns and geographical areas where any overland evacuation of individuals from that area would cause those evacuating to traverse highways or bridges, bringing them close to the power station. Well, that includes the whole Cape. The Outer Cape, which is where Down Cape Downwinders kind of concentrates its activities, is actually according to the prevailing winds, which usually go towards the east, only 20 to 25 miles away from the nuclear power plant in case of an accident. And as you know, the current emergency planning is to shelter in place, and the bridges will be closed, which is laughable. I mean, the sheet actually tells us to close our windows and lock our doors, as if that were sufficient protection from any kind of accident. And we will be within that area that is hit the soonest after an accident. And you've also heard the testimony about the Pilgrim plant being one of the least, like maybe the least, or nuclear power plant in the country. It's the same model as Fukushima. The State Department had a 50-mile evacuation zone from Fukushima. I think, the possibility of an accident either before it closes or certainly after it closes are relatively high. The Entergy said that they were moving rapidly to put spent fuel rods in dry cask storage, but in fact, the current pool is holding, more than 4 times its planned capacity, and it is already in a dangerous state. So we are strongly in favor of this bill, which would include our section of the Cape and probably and some more sections of the Cape in the emergency planning zone. And I think for the record, I would like to say that Down Cape, Downwinders also supports the other 5 bills in this hearing that are related to the dangers of the Pilgrim nuclear plant. And I'm out of time, so I won't name the numbers.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shepherd. Okay, I think that was everyone signed up for House Bill 2472. House Bill 2472. Okay? So House Bill 2473, also filed by Representative Peake. Let's see, Maurice Stamos, we heard from her already, I believe. Yes? Louise Bartow?
Maybe.
Okay, Bartow, you're up.
And I think I still remember the point we almost spoke about. I'm sorry I stood up. I didn't understand that was...
Ready to answer that question?
I'm ready to go.
You're ready to go. Appreciate it.
My name is Louise Bartow, and I live in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. I'm a part-time deckhand on the famous tugboat, the Jaguar. But he gave me the day off. The captain gave me the day off because he believes this is important work we do up here. Everybody in the room, this is important work. The point that we were thinking about was, isn't there already a health study about wind turbines? There was a literature review created for what I think was political purposes. What we're interested in is a proper health study where people who are experiencing symptoms are included in the conversation and are tested medically. Now, that's really the two different things, and it's hard to kind of get that across sometimes because the health study is touted as saying there aren't any health symptoms, but I can tell you from living in the town of Fairhaven there are, and I'm just going to read you a list of what I know. My community has reported on the following symptoms to the Board of Health in over 850 official complaints. That's the citizens of my town have taken the time 850 times to say I'm having these symptoms, and no one is listening to them. We're really hoping that you guys will listen to us. These are debilitating headaches, vertigo, sleep interruption, heart rhythm entrainment, sinus and jaw conditions, depression, and exhaustion. Some of the corollaries are divorce, children who can't live with their families, people who are, we think, having premature death due to living close to these turbines. In our town, they're very close. Our community is living within 1,200 to 1,500 feet of 2 400-foot wind turbines, and people are sick. But they have given up reporting because over a 3-year period, they went to the Board of Health 850 times, and nobody is listening to them. And in fact, what's really curious is that in our haste to embrace this new type of power generation, which I know we want to have as a people, but no one's listening to the people who are experiencing it. No one anywhere, Australia, Germany, Canada, Scandinavia, Mexico, Falmouth, Fairhaven, Savoy. Actually, Savoy is the wrong town. I'm going to forget the right name, but I'll move on. Savoy is considering putting up turbines, and they're really worried about this. I mean, I know it's happening because I live in the town. I know my community. I know what they're telling me. I have a friend who describes the heart rhythm entrainment. That's scary stuff, you know. And in fact, in our town, the DEP tested and found we are generating sound over the state limit. But they still have not ever spoken to the people who have these symptoms. I'm here, and I'm taking the day off from my exciting life as a tugboat deckhand to ask you, please, let's try to find an answer, a truthful, independent answer by creating a limelight commission. And then let's ask the people who live next to them. These things go 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. If we want to know what it's like to live next to a wind turbine, I think we should ask the people who actually do. Thank you very much. I apologize for going over the time.
Question for you.
Yes.
So
Sir.
All 800 complaints in the town you live in.
Yes.
So you're saying absolutely nothing's been done all that time to investigate the complaints, take any...
Correct. Nothing to investigate them. Nothing to investigate them. However, and here's another curious twist, the Mass DEP did the testing, and then they met behind closed doors with the Mass CEC, the turbine developers who are private. It's not a town operation. And they created a mitigation plan. And the mitigation plan is ridiculous. It only operates between 12 p.m. and 4 a.m., which is the only hours they tested. And they're never going to shut them down in the rain. Why? Because they never tested in the rain. Well, clearly, if they're over the sound violation at 4 a.m., under the same set of conditions at 4 p.m., they would be. But this mitigation, again, they came to that without any input from the people who actually have these symptoms. And in fact, not one person was interviewed for the Mass Department, the DEP's health study.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Sorry
it.
to be so passionate.
Appreciate that you took the day off to be with us.
I'm very glad to. Thank you.
Lily Green. Ms. Green. Hi.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. I'm Lily Green, speaking as a citizen. I'm CEO of a wealthy-based healthcare consulting firm with a national reach that was formed in 1979. I'm also an elected county official representing my town as assembly delegate, which is the legislative branch. I worked with my state rep, Sarah Peak, on H2473, the resolve that is before us. Senator Sear, who also sits on your committee, is a co-sponsor as well. It's the third legislative session that this bill has come before you. I urge the committee to support this bill by voting to report this resolve out of committee to Ways and Means, as you did 2 years ago. Since 2010, I've researched the health impacts of wind turbines. I've conducted videotaped interviews with over 200 people in 15 countries around the world, and have a handout for you. The reality is that wind turbines cause health problems for some people living and working nearby. The symptoms, in addition to what Louise said, are high blood pressure, even in the heart attack and stroke range, dizziness and nausea so bad that people have to hold on to their walls of their house to walk around their own home, and chronic sleep deprivation, which leads to a host of other chronic illnesses that Massachusetts has the goals of reducing. The most vulnerable populations seem to be most susceptible to these symptoms, like children and the elderly. In Massachusetts, people have been told by their doctors to move, and some have abandoned their homes. This is a dose response. The symptoms become worse over time. Not one person who stayed near wind turbines reported to us that they got used to it or they got better. And although I was highly skeptical initially, I've interviewed people on 3 continents who live over 5 miles from the nearest wind turbine, and they report experiencing health impacts. One lives in Massachusetts. Given it's a dose response and wind turbines are projected to spin for 20 years, we don't know how far away we need to site them. There are 23 verified locations across Massachusetts where people have reported these health impacts. Furthermore, people the world over reported that they and their healthcare providers puzzled over health problems and that appeared after wind turbines were constructed near their homes. Many endured a large battery of medical tests at a significant cost to the healthcare system without a definitive diagnosis. I know you're working on legislation to streamline the healthcare costs. This legislation can help reduce costs as well. There's a problem in Massachusetts with people who are made sick after wind turbines nearby become operational. There's no patient education resources. Healthcare providers, city and town officials, and boards don't have adequate information or resources. This bill hopefully will change that, since it's modeled after the highly successful Lyme Disease Commission. Unfortunately, there's not effective mechanisms in Massachusetts to deal with the health problems people have faced. Mass DEP, under the past administration, did create a wind science panel. That's Mass DEP. And frankly, very briefly, some of the problems were that it was a biased panel who met in secret and whose findings were severely flawed. They didn't even receive a CD-ROM with over 200 documents that took 3 months to compile, that included peer-reviewed documents, within their purview, and was submitted to DEP, and which I have confirmation was received. Frankly, that's the reason why this legislation is here today, is because I've been working with Sarah Peak since 2010. In July of that year, we met with the the commissioner of DPH. He promised he would do something. We followed up with him week in and week out. The next time we met with them, it was in April of the following year. And in that time, it had gone from DPH over to DEP, and DEP, on the third day that Commissioner Kimmel was in office, he called a senior staff member in and told them to do this. Now, told him to get this panel together and to get this report done. And because of the results of that, that's why Representative Peake has this bill before you today. And this is a third legislative session. The courts have already said that there's irreparable damage to people in Falmouth. And what we're asking you to do is just go forth on the state level and please report this bill out favorably to Ways and Means. It doesn't cost anything. It could save money in Massachusetts. Thank you very much. And I will submit this summary. It also has information about DEP, just if you want to follow up. And also, if you do have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you. All that information you compiled, looks like you've done a lot of very good research.
I have. Thank you. May I ask you a consideration? Given that I am an assembly delegate, which is the legislative branch of county government, I'm also representing my town on the National Park Service Cape Cod National Seashore Advisory Commission that's appointed by the Secretary of the Interior, and I've worked with my town Board of Selectmen. May I just speak a few moments on the Pilgrim bills? On the bills regarding radiation and Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant? May I?
I think at this point we really, if you want to stay, you can let other people testify if you want to stay, and you still would like to be called.
Okay, I just wanted to record that on all levels of government on Cape Cod, we are concerned about safety and have
so we record you as being in strong support of those bills as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Louise Grabowski already testified, right? Yes. Okay. David Moriarty? Yes.
Would you like me to give you a copy of this letter I'm about to read? Should I?
Yeah, you could just leave it with the committee staff at the end of it when you're done.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. My name's David Moriarty. I'm from Falmouth, Massachusetts. I believe the home of the worst placed wind turbine project in probably the entire country, in my opinion, and the judge's opinion too. I'm here today on behalf of Barry Funfar. He's my neighbor, my friend, very, very courageous man. And this is what Barry has to present to the committee today. He couldn't come because he was afraid. He was afraid that he might have a heart attack, he might suffer a panic attack, because this is what the result of industrial wind turbines being placed too close in a residential home does to a human being. This letter is asking you for a favorable report out of committee on Bill H247. I am a victim, neighbor of the Falmouth, Massachusetts municipal wind turbines. It took over 7 years and the loss of my home, my health, to finally win and shut down Falmouth Wind 1 and Wind 2 Vestas 1.5 megawatt wind turbines in Barnstable Superior Court. Judge Moriarty on June 20th, 2017 rendered the decision to stop them. The town of Falmouth did not appeal the decision. The health and well-being of my wife and myself, along with that of many neighbors, was severely detrimentally impacted by these mammoth machines. Our lives have been totally disrupted, our financial positions destroyed because of the policies and the flagrant disregard of the citizens by the state of Massachusetts and the town of Falmouth. 3 refinancings of my home to pay attorney fees have resulted in our not being able to afford our home. We once had totally paid off. A $480,000 30-year mortgage at 71 years of age is impossible for us to maintain. Massachusetts unfortunately fell into the dangerous rut of doing everything in its power to advance wind power. Governor Patrick's goal of 2,000 megawatts of wind power capacity by 2020 pushed every state agency to the point of disregard for its own citizens' health and welfare. We turbine neighbors became collateral damage to the renewable goal. My experience with the Mass Clean Energy Center, Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Public Utilities, and the Department of Health attest to the inhumane treatment received. Please turn the corner. For the sake of your constituents, advance some policy to begin to correct some of the many, many wrongs concerning the siting of wind turbines in Massachusetts. It is already years too late for many of us, but my hope is that the experience we have and the facts that we have learned will translate into protection for the people of Massachusetts. For the deleterious effects of too close wind turbines, I thank you in advance sincerely. Barry Funfar, 27 Ridgeview Drive, Falmouth, Massachusetts. I would just like to add very quickly, this failed wind turbine fiasco program of Massachusetts has ruined 21 communities, put many, many hard-working Massachusetts families in jeopardy of losing their homes. You've bankrupted them. You've ruined their families. For what? For an experiment that failed in Boone, North Carolina in 1987. The research was already done. We already have the science. $20 million was spent by the Department of Energy and NASA to find out that you cannot put these machines next to human habitation because of the infrasound coming off of the machines. It's been known for 30 goddamn years. This was no accident. This is a travesty. And we are counting on you to clean this mess up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
And here, I'll just leave these.
Appreciate you pass on to your neighbor as well.
Thank you.
James Rogers? Will you testify with Mr. Rogers? Okay. All right. Is there anyone else who hasn't yet testified on House Bill 2473? Are you Mr. Rogers?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Yeah. James Rogers from Sandwich. My suggestion would be, why would you not want to do this study, to continue a study? The Barnstable Court has turned off the turbines in Falmouth. There are reports across the country of physical, neurological harm to people. You would have to believe that the people who are complaining are fools or liars. And I assure you, as a neighbor of the many people in Falmouth with whom I've spoken, they are neither. Please continue a serious, independent epidemiological study of land-based wind turbines. Thanks.
Anyone else for House Bill 2473? Okay, we're going to move on then to House Bill 2478. House Bill 2478 and Catherine Roberts.
I didn't leave. Thank you, Senator Lewis and the committee, and especially Representative Keefe from my hometown of Worcester, yes. My name is Catherine Robertson, and I am Executive Director of the Massachusetts Chemistry and Technology Alliance that represents the manufacturers, users, and distributors of chemistry in Massachusetts. I commend you all for sitting through the heat today. I keep going out there. I don't know how you're doing it. I am submitting detailed testimony to the committee, but for the purposes of this hearing, I will be brief. I am here to oppose two bills, House 2479, which restricts the use of highly effective cleaning projects, potentially even bleach, disinfectants, and sanitizers in places that serve vulnerable populations, and Senate 1191, which requires companies to list chemistry used in children's products and household goods. Among other provisions, both pieces of legislation require that the state collect, review, maintain, and update data and enforce compliance. Both bills put the cost of this substantial new state bureaucracy on the backs of manufacturers who operate or do business in Massachusetts. Both bills impose new regulatory and reporting requirements on companies which are already investing hundreds and even thousands of person-hours a year on compliance and reporting alone. MACTA members care about their employees, their families, their communities, and the health and welfare of the people in the Commonwealth. They understand the high cost of doing business in the state. They are vested in environmental stewardship. They look at exposure when formulating products. Legislation such as this imposes an unnecessary burden that does not generate a benefit. Before I stop, I just want to relate a quick story. A few nights back, I received a phone call from an environmental organization of which I'm a member. After outlining a policy priority, the young woman launched into an attack on industry, saying that chemistry opposed a certain piece of legislation. I was irked. I nicely identified myself, corrected her, and cut the conversation first. The last time I checked, MACTA and its members were neutral on that issue. But this underscores the perception of any action that regulates or bans chemistry is positive and necessary. This is simply not the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robertson.
Oh, any questions? Okay.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on House Bill 2478? 2478. All right. Moving on to House Bill 2479. Also Representative Smizek. Don't see anyone signed up for that bill. Does anyone want to speak on 2479? Okay. No one? Okay. So we're going to move on to House Bill 3245, Representative Pocock. Anybody here on that bill? 3245. Okay. Moving to House Bill 3252. Representative Smizek also on polystyrene. Let's see. We have Mike Levy and Ken Paul. And then a third person. Paul Poe? Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you for your patience. You're up.
Thank you, Senator Lewis, committee members, and it gives me a great appreciation of what you do on a regular basis. My name is Ken McAuliffe, and I reside in Walpole, Massachusetts, born and raised in the state of Massachusetts for the last 67 years. I come to you, as somebody perhaps said in one of the presentations earlier, at ground zero. When it comes to food service packaging, I'm on the street. I am a salesperson. I've been a salesperson for 43 years, and I have been considered as a food packaging specialist. I call on many of the chains, many of the restaurateurs, many of the schools, colleges, universities, and so forth in trying to develop good packaging materials for them to use. Never in the 43 years of selling disposable products have I ever heard of anyone having any type of a health issue or a sickness or a problem in consuming foods from a polystyrene container. Polystyrene food service items are by nature problem solvers, not problem makers. The reason I say problem solvers is that polystyrene food service trays are the most economical way in which to serve countless school food service lunches every day in America. They're low cost to help keep costs in line without inflating budgets or increasing overhead for towns, cities, and county school systems is a must. Many hospital, nursing homes, assisted living facilities rely on low-cost items in serving infectious disease, communicable disease patients so that they can dispose of these products and not pass on any of these contagious diseases. Many segments of the food service industry rely on the competitive nature of polystyrene, and especially expanded polystyrene, which is foam-based product. Most of them rely on it in order to compete in the marketplace. Asian, Latin and Middle Eastern restaurants offer low-cost alternatives to the competition and are in need of low-cost packaging. The industry, as I said, being on the street, the industry is in a state of evolvement. Polystyrene food service packaging is archaic in the industry. It was one of the first vehicles to come out to do the job that it's intended to do. Over the past 7, 8, 9 years, different materials, different resins, different substrates have come onto the market, which are making the newer generation of consumers gravitate to wanting those containers, those types of food service packaging. I only ask you to visit one of the newest supermarket chains to move into the Massachusetts area. Visit a Wegmans in Westwood, Medford, Burlington, Chestnut Hill, Northborough, and look at the packaging that they're supplying. Today's trends are that the newer consumer wants two things most importantly when it comes to food packaging and food service. They want sustainable packaging, and they want farm-to-table etiquette. And those are the two hot buttons. And the marketplace is evolving to that. I brought some samples rather than go over my time with the samples and so forth. But in this bag, there's a styrene container that costs about 10 cents. And then it goes from 10 cents all the way up to about 45 cents in packaging. My only suggestion in this whole thing is to let the marketplace dictate what it wants to do. And I can honestly say it is happening. The growth and the sustainable type packages that you're all seeing out there, whether it be fiber, different types of resins, different types of filler resins and so forth, is growing at the rate of 9 to 10%. All right? I thank you for your time, and I have submitted the bullet points that I did.
Hello, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Paul Poe, and I work with Dart Container Corporation. We're a food service manufacturer, just like the gentleman before me. I have a couple points I wanted to hit on. A few were already made here. I'm not going to read my testimony, but there are 5 general things that I think are important to remember here. Number 1 is the health issue, and I believe my colleague Mike Levy will be speaking more to that. And from the definition section of this bill, I wasn't for sure whether schools and hospitals and homeless shelters and abuse shelters were covered. It was a very good point because one of my other topics is cost effectiveness. It seems to be applying only to food service, like what we think of as restaurants. Second issue is litter and recycling. Polystyrene is 100% recyclable. And this little thing right here is a 16-ounce cup. It can be melted back, pelletized, and reused again in polystyrene uses. And some of those things are picture frames. If you go to Target or Walmart, this is any picture frame you get that's plastic will be recycled polystyrene. And like this quarter round and crown molding that you get at Home Depot that's green and you can paint, that's all reused polystyrene. The life cycle analysis of a styrofoam cup. Styrofoam is actually a technical term owned by Dow Chemical. It refers specifically to insulation, but people often call a foam cup styrofoam. But that's, you know, it's like a Kleenex in a tissue. So, the life cycle analysis of expanded polystyrene, it takes less energy, less water, less natural resources. It's 100% recyclable and easier to recycle than a hot paper cup. And I'm not here to badmouth any substrate. Dart makes about between 3,000 and 4,000 different products. Everything from the red Solo cup that you have in your backyard parties to foam cups that you get your coffee in, or Kentucky Fried Chicken side dishes, you know, and the little Solo cups that you get to put your ketchup in, things like that. So we make everything, paper, plastic, compostable products. But for the life cycle analysis, 1-to-1, a foam cup is actually better for the environment because it's for the reasons that I've stated and in my testimony. Foam is as I mentioned, 100% recyclable, even what they call dirty foam. It's easier to wash a foam cup or a foam clamshell where you get your takeaway food in than a pizza box, which has oil, you know, when you pull a piece out. So that is contaminated paper and not recyclable there. So that's not an issue with foam. And last, and this was hit on briefly a moment ago, is the cost and performance of a foam cup. It's the best cost alternative to any substrate on the market, and it keeps hot things hot and cold things cold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Mike Levy, and I'm the Senior Director for a group called the Plastics Food Service Packaging Group. We represent the manufacturers of all different food service products, including DART and everyone else here. We're opposed to the bill because our experience is that once agencies across the U.S. find out about the uses and benefits and the environmental safety health of polystyrene foam food service, basically they conclude that there really is no reason to ban. In fact, no state has ever passed a ban on this. In the short time that I'm here, I just want to kind of amplify, especially for the real concerns about health and safety and sanitation. And frankly, that's why disposables were invented back 60 years ago. It was the old Dixie cup on the train passing around. But the bottom line is, polystyrene foam is safe. The FDA has basically measured this over 50 years. And in fact, there's, I think, some confusion between the chemical styrene, which is used to make polystyrene, and then the actual polystyrene, which are things like insulation, food service, and things like that. Styrene is a liquid. The amount of styrene in polystyrene is infinitesimal. And basically, the EPA and the FDA are charged with overseeing the safety of these products. When it comes to the safety, let me read real quickly, and this is in your packet, so I'm not going to go over it, but this is an industry, but there's 5 major agencies that have studied polystyrene. And after styrene was listed, the U.S. National Toxicology Program Director said that when it comes to polystyrene, the low levels show that it's safe. We have no concerns. Earlier today, there was a woman from representing United States National Institutes of Environmental Health. They too have done the same thing. These are toxicologists and epidemiologists. Otis Brawley, the Chief Medical Office of the American Society of Cancer, said polystyrene food service, not a health issue. And then right here in Boston, the Harvard Center for Risk Analysis did about a 20-year study and looked at all the styrene applications and said the low level really makes it not an issue. But one of the things that I did want to also hammer home here is that one of the reasons that that disposables and polystyrene are really used, especially around public health, nursing homes, and things like that, is the whole sanitation issue. And studies have been done. In fact, there's a lot of studies that have been done on sanitation that look at washing, reusables and dishwashers and things like that. These studies have been done out in California and Michigan, and they actually show that after dishwashers go through all that stuff, there's still a very high level of bacteria, and you get absolutely none of that in a disposable like polystyrene. And frankly, that's one of the reasons that schools and hospitals and nursing homes not only use polystyrene foam food service, but all of the disposable food service. It just makes a big difference. And then finally, in some cases, when you ask the question why you'd want to ban it, usually the answer is something about either health and safety or litter. And polystyrene foam's been measured around the country. It's a fairly small contributor, but make no mistake, our plastics industry does everything we can to support no one putting plastics in the oceans and litter. And the way we do it is we usually fund expert groups like Keep America Beautiful and things like that that really get at the behavior changes. But for those communities that did ban polystyrene foam takeout, and there's been a handful of them, the only city that we're aware of that ever did a study to see if it made a difference was San Francisco. San Francisco back in 2006 banned polystyrene takeout. Basically 2 items, foam cups and clamshells that you just saw there. And then a year later, the San Francisco street audit people came in and measured item by item by item of those replacement products, cups and bowls and plates and snack wraps. And they found something that we said all along. You'll change the mix of litter, but if you don't get at the causes, you'll get just as much litter. In fact, they got more. So all I'm saying is that rather than a ban, we would like to offer resources to recycle, recover, and when it comes to sustainability, as Ken just said here, because polystyrene foam is 2% plastic and 98% air, it tends to be sustainable. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, next up we have another panel. Is it Lisa only? Lisa, sorry. Lisa only. Raina McManus, Clint Richmond, and Janet Aldrich.
Thank you very much. Let's start. My name is Lisa Olney. I'm here today with my colleague Raina McManus on behalf of the Wellesley Natural Resources Commission in support of House Bill 3252, proposed by Frank Smizek and Senator Mike Barrett. The Wellesley Natural Resources Commission is a 5-member elected board with broad responsibility for our town's conservation land, parks, and natural resources. In April 2016, our board proposed a ban on single-use plastic checkout bags at Wellesley's annual town meeting. The resolution passed by resounding acclamation and went into effect in January 2017. There were 3 primary reasons we proposed this ban. Number 1, our town recycling facility was no longer accepting plastic bags because there